On tonight's news, India somewhat shaky on Russia invading Ukraine, Biden says. Troops deployed as fuel scarcity sparks protests in Sri Lanka. Grim search as rescue teams comb hillside in China Eastern crash. In controversial visit to Myanmar, ASEAN envoy meets generals. And has Russia's offensive really stalled on all fronts in Ukraine? Thanks for staying with us. This is the International News Desk on ECWA Television Africa. I am Lois Turaki. Here are details of top stories. President Joe Biden has said only India amongst the Quad group of countries is somewhat shaky in acting against Russia over its attack of Ukraine as India tries to stabilize its ties with Russia and the West. While the other Quad countries, the United States, Japan and Australia, have sanctioned Russian entities, India has not enforced sanctions or even condemned Russia, its biggest supplier of military hardware. Biden told the Business Forum on Monday, referring to Russian President Vladimir Putin in response to his aggression, "We have presented a united front throughout the NATO and in the Pacific." The Quad, with the possible exception of India, Japan has been extremely strong. So is Australia in terms of dealing with Putin's aggression. Although India has grown close to the United States in recent years, it still relies on Russia for a constant supply of arms and ammunition amidst a Himalayan border standoff with China and perennial tension with Pakistan. India has advised to put an end to the violence in Ukraine but has not refrained from voting against its old Cold War ally Russia. India is also considering buying more Russian oil at a discount, with two of its state companies lately ordering 5 million barrels. Indian analysts and government officials point out that European countries are buying gas from Russia. Now, Sri Lanka has told its military to deploy soldiers at hundreds of petrol stations to help dispense fuel after a sudden spike in prices of major commodities, and the accompanying shortages forced tens of thousands of people to queue for hours. The Indian Ocean island nation is fighting a foreign exchange crisis that forced the devaluation of its currency and hit payments for vital imports such as food, medicine, fuel, and prompting the government to approach the International Monetary Fund (IMF). Officials said on Tuesday the decision to station troops near petrol pumps and kerosene supply points came after 3 elderly people dropped dead during their wait in long queues. Military spokesman Nilatha Primathrini said at least 2 army personnel will be deployed at every fuel point, adding that the soldiers will help organize fuel distribution but will not be involved in crowd control. The change was a reaction to a complaint of stockpiling and inefficient distribution, said government spokesman Ramesh Pathirana. The military has been deployed to help the public, not to curtail their human rights, he added. Rescuers in China are combing heavily wooded slopes in southern China, where a China Eastern airline crashed and exploded in flames. According to reports, no survivors have been found. About 132 people, including 9 crew, were on flight MU5735 when it crashed in the mountains of southern Guangxi on a flight from Kunming to Guangzhou. The Boeing 737-800 crash is the first involving a commercial aircraft in China since 2010. Reports says the crash had created a deep pit in the mountainside. Other outlets reported that the burned remains of identity cards, purses and wallets had been seen. The plane, flying at a cruising altitude, suddenly plunged from the sky. Flight tracking website Flight Radar 24 showed the aircraft dropped from an altitude of 29,100 feet, that's 8,870 meters, to 7,850 feet through 2,393 meters in just over a minute. After a brief upswing, it then plunged to 3,225 feet, that's 982 meters, the tracker said. According to a resident, the plane fell vertically from the sky, adding that the plane did not emit smoke during the fall. It fell into the mountains and started a fire. Still on the news, a Southeast Asian envoy has met Myanmar's military rulers on a controversial first trip to the crisis-hit country. Special Envoy for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, Prak Sokhon, began his three-day visit on Monday by holding meetings with Armed Forces Chief Min Aung Hlaing, who seized power in a coup in February 2021. The two men discussed the situation of protests and violence stemming from political disagreement and humanitarian cooperation, the junta's information team said in a statement. ASEAN General Secretary General Lim Jong-hoi, who is from Brunei, was also at the meeting, along with the military's foreign minister Wunamong Luin. Cambodia, which currently holds the ASEAN chair, declined to say who else the envoy, who is also Cambodia's deputy prime minister, will meet. ASEAN has been leading diplomatic efforts to end the turmoil released by last year's power grab when the military ousted elected leader Aung San Suu Kyi's government, causing mass protests, national strikes, and conflicts in rural areas and with ethnic armed groups. Over than 1,600 people have been killed in the violence and at least 10,000 people detained, with some 500,000 people forced from their homes, according to Tom Andrews, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Myanmar. Prak Sokhon's trip comes amid frustration in ASEAN over Min Aung Hlaing's failure to honor the 5-point ASEAN countries' consensus to end hostilities and start a peace process that he agreed to last year after a summit in Jakarta, the Indonesian capital. Cambodia, whose strongman leader Hun Sen has been in power for more than 30 years, is hoping it can kickstart dialogue after ASEAN took the unprecedented decision to bar the generals from its summits. The ASEAN envoy was in Myanmar as the United States declared the military's brutal 2017 assault on the Rohingya minority as genocide and crimes against humanity. The crackdown forced hundreds of thousands of people to flee across the border in Bangladesh, where they remain in refugee camps 5 years later. The U.S. said the military had been using the same tactics since the coup. Meanwhile, Andrews told the United Nations Human Rights Council on Monday that war crimes and crimes against humanity are being committed every day with impunity by the military junta of Myanmar, and urged the international community to take concrete action to end the bloodshed. The United Kingdom's Defense Ministry last week said Russia's military campaign in Ukraine has largely delayed on all fronts, with President Vladimir Putin's forces suffering losses and making minimal progress on land, sea, or air. The evaluation was in line with other fresh propositions from Western capitals that after almost a month of launching an invasion on February 24th, Moscow has missed its most essential war goals. Months before attacking Ukraine, Russia had massed more than 200,000 troops along the border. The Kremlin anticipated the campaign will go swiftly, and some observers say Russia did not prepare for a lengthy military conflict in terms of logistics, supplies, the rotation of combat troops, and information technology. John R. Denny, research professor at the United States Army War College's Strategic Studies Institute, said it does appear that the campaign is experiencing greater difficulty than expected in terms of advancement. This is most likely the result of poor planning, poor morale, poor logistics, and the stiff resistance of Ukrainian forces. The present conflict more closely resembles the war between the Soviet Union and Finland in 1939 to 1940, when the advance of Soviet troops, having captured the insignificant border area, was quickly halted by the resistance of the defenders. Ukrainian resistance remains staunch and well coordinated, while the vast majority of Ukrainian territory, including all other major cities, remain in Ukrainian hands, the UK's defense ministry said. According to many Western analysts, Moscow underestimated Ukraine's ability and readiness to fight. Moreover, in a personalist dictatorship such as Putin's, no one has any incentive to contradict the leader because their own political and often personal survival depends on his whims, said Alexander B. Dons, Associate Professor of Political Science and International Affairs at the George Washington University. More stories. Back on the shores of Africa, Senegalese president voices an alarm on major challenge of the century as water forum begins. Shortages, poor water quality and a lack of financing are just some of the many challenges of this year's World Water Forum in Dakar. The 9th forum started on Monday as delegations from all over the world assembled to deliberate the theme of water security for peace and development. Citing a United Nations report, Senegalese President Sall reminded his guests water is a major challenge for the 21st century. There is every reason to believe that if nothing is done, the situation will get worse, due in specific to strong demographic pressure, speedy urbanization, and polluting industrial activities. This 9th World Water Forum gives us the chance to sound the alarm on the gravity of the situation so that water issues remain at the heart of the international agenda. Coastal countries leaders like Guinea-Bissau, Guinean President Mbalo stressed the particular fate of African countries extremely dependent on the resource. In the world, 2 in 5 adults already live in regions where access to water is scarce. To reduce this number, the president of the Water Council suggested a profound behavioral change. Technology and the contribution of digital technology will not be enough, Lois Fauches started. We must certainly innovate again, and innovate always. Pump, transfer, desalinate, recycle, and increase the amount of water available. But we also need to change our habits and behaviors, and only then will we be able to share water for people and water for nature. President Sall received during the opening ceremony a report on the potential of groundwater from Audrey Azoulay, the UNESCO Director General. Groundwater accounts for 99% of liquid fresh water on Earth and is an unexpected resource. During the 6-day forum, world leaders will look for solutions to ensure water access to everybody. Confirmation hearings of Jackson, the first black woman nominee, starts. On Monday, Ketanji Brown Jackson, United States Supreme Court nominee, promised to sustain democracy on the first day of her confirmation hearings in Washington. Ketanji Brown Jackson sought to defend the grand experiment of American democracy as she launched a historic bid to be the first black woman on the nation's highest judicial bench. The federal judge who may become the first black female justice was formally introduced to the 22 senators on the Judiciary Committee on Monday. She said, "Members of this committee, if I am confirmed, I commit to you that I will work productively to support and defend the Constitution. I have been a judge for nearly a decade now, and I take that responsibility and my duty to be independent very seriously." President Joe Biden's choice has a decade of experience on lower courts. Jackson before served as a law clerk. Stephen Breyer, the retiring justice she is set to replace. As the final word on all civil and criminal legal disputes, the Supreme Court seeks to ensure equal justice under the law. At the moment, 3 justices picked by a Democratic president sit on the Supreme Court. A nomination of Jackson will not change the balance. Her nomination is being conducted by a 50-50 chamber controlled by Democrats. No red flags have been raised about Jackson's record that would endanger her prospects, and Republicans have pledged to avoid the kind of character assassination they argue Democrats staged before the confirmation of Justice Brett Kavanaugh in 2018. But conservatives have been gesturing that they plan to go after her record as a public defender and raise rulings they say were too merciful in a bid to frame Biden via his nominee as soft on crime ahead of November's midterm elections. In a marked disparity to the solemn atmosphere inside the hearing, supporters of Jackson staged a jubilant rally outside the nearby Supreme Court, wearing T-shirts decorated with the judge's image and waving placards. The committee is meeting through Thursday to consider her nomination. Democratic leaders plan a final Senate vote next April. And finally, President of Central African Republic opens peace talks in spite opposition boycott. Yesterday, the Central African Republic began national reconciliation discussions in a bid to bring peace to the troubled country, but no rebel groups were invited and the opposition is boycotting the forum. Representatives of the ruling party, civil society figures, and invited guests attended the opening of the Central African Republic National Reconciliation Talks. Faustin Todera promised in late 2020 to hold a so-called Republican dialogue for reconciliation. Several hundred people attended the launch of the forum in the National Assembly. According to the president's spokesman, the talks are a good opportunity to start over. Albert Yaloki Mkwame said Central Africans have desired this dialogue. For a long time, they wanted to talk to each other because our country has seen many crises which made it necessary to discourse. I'm expecting frank debates over the country, the economy, bad governance, security, lawyer Bruno Gbega said, according to reports. If the political opposition had demanded such talks, they were not in the National Assembly for the opening ceremony. Former President Boze's party, KNNK, and other political groups boycotted the talks because rebel groups were not invited. They also cited the fact that the 2020 post-election crisis didn't appear in the talks roadmap. The Central African Republic has been mired in civil war since 2013, despite United Nations peacekeeping mission, which has been present in the country since 2014. Security remains a fleeting dream for the majority of Central Africans. Many thanks for watching, but before we go, a quick reminder of our top stories. India somewhat shaky on Russia invading Ukraine, Biden says. Troops deployed as fuel scarcity sparks protest in Sri Lanka. Grim search as rescue teams cope hillside in China Eastern crash. In controversial visit to Myanmar, ASEAN envoy meets general. And has Russia's offensive really stalled in all fronts in Ukraine? Remember, if you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything. Have a blessed evening.